Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Bury My Heart at Chuck E. Cheese's by Tiffany Midge. Foreword by Geary Hobson. Narrated by Charlotte Flyte. Gag me with a coup stick. Indian Valley Girl. Me. How do you say pseudo-intellectual in Lakota? Sherwin B. Pseudo, spelled S-I-O-U-X-D-O, intellectual. Exchange on Facebook. Forward. Geary Hobson. Over time, too much time if you ask me, Native American people have generally been portrayed by the dominant culture as being entirely without the least vestiges of humor. Stolid, dour, ready to pounce on you if you are white, and take away that unnecessary scalp. And, of course, if you are Louis L'Amour, that's all that Indians do. Too much James Fenimore Cooper, Robert Montgomery Bird, William Gilmore Simms, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, nearly every Puritan scribbler that ever was, even Mark Twain, the premier funny man of American letters himself, Hemingway, Faulkner, and oh, the list can go on. For them, Indians are without the least flicker of a smile, a half-joke or two, a grin, not a tickle in the ribs, nothing. Despite such nearly ignored portrayals by Washington Irving in A Tour on the Prairies, in which at one point he describes some Osage warriors around a campfire, laughing and joking and doing drum beats with fists on their chests, cracking up Irving and his fellow tourists with their antics. This in 1832. Yes, non-Indian American people, humor does exist among Native American people, and much more present than the average reader probably seems likely to imagine. But it has always been there, in the writing as well as the living. Washington Irving wasn't wrong. Just a glance at the writings by certain Native writers will effectively bear this out. Take the 19th century, the century of dishonor, when Natives were beginning to adapt to the reading and writing of the dominant culture, in which they were being forced to become a part. You will find humor, and often quite surprising at most times. Just as the post-Civil War era knew the writings of American funny guy journalists such as Twain himself and Josh Billings, Peter Finlay Dunn, Mr. Dooley and Company, and others, there was a similar rise of Native American journalists, as well in tribal newspapers of the day. DeWitt Duncan Clinton, Alexander L. Posey, Fus Fixico, Joseph Lynch, Uncle Joe, Martin, Wuchi Uchi, Dan Medrano. For more on this, just check out the now classic work by Daniel F. Littlefield Jr. and James W. Perrins, A Bio-Bibliography of Native American Writing, 1772 to 1924. All this funny Indian stuff was actually made international in scope and outlook by someone who carried the humor of Indians to surprising heights and locales. The Cherokee writer, cowboy, and movie star, Will Rogers. Some say he's a funny guy because he's mostly white. No, gentle listener. Examine Rogers's humor more closely, and you will find that it is very much a product of the milieu he came from. Relocated Indians doing their best to survive in the dominant culture into which they were dumped. And Indian humor continues to the present day and, I strongly believe, grows more potent and deadly with each generation. Here are a few to scan for a laugh or two from the first wave of the Native American literary renaissance, 1968 to 92. The Airplane Man segment of James Welch's now classic Winter in the Blood. There's Simon Ortiz's personal expressions and reactions attendant on the birth of his and the renowned poet Joy Harjo's daughter, Rainy Dawn, as he awaited Rainy's coming into the world in Notes for My Child, in which, though anxious and apprehensive, he records his experience with wonderful humor and humanity. And how about the work of Gerald Vizenor, Carter Rivard, Jim Northrup, Leanne Howe? Here, without equivocation, you will find mucho laughs amid scenes of deep seriousness. And then, in the second phase of the Renaissance, 1992 to the present, there's a hilarious plotline of D.L. Birchfield's short story, Never Again, in which a Choctaw brother persuades his sibling to accompany him on a long, several days hiking and camping expedition in the Ouachita Mountains, without telling the younger brother that a severe snowstorm is expected in the region, and then gets a kick out of the whole thing when the younger brother is totally unprepared by wearing summer-like clothing and using a thin sleeping bag. And also by Donnie Birchfield. How about the titles of two of his books? How Choctaws Invented Civilization and How Choctaws Will Conquer the World, and the Oklahoma Basic Intelligence Test? Indeed, they say it all, with just about a laugh on every page. And how about Diane Burns's Sure, You Can Ask Me a Personal Question, in which the poet lampoons certain non-Indians' often dim-wittedness about the most basic things regarding Indians, such as, why do they have black hair and high cheekbones? And of course, there's Drew Hayden Taylor and his Funny, You Don't Look Like One, with 3 sequels, and Only Drunks and Children Tell the Truth, as well as all the funny stuff to be found in the writings of Craig S. Womack, Tim Tingle, William S. Yellowrobe Jr., Richard Van Camp, Don Dumont, and Kateri Akawenzi Dam, all, more often than not, as funny as a rubber crutch. And now, Tiffany Midge, and particularly the book at hand. Heck, the title alone is guaranteed to crack you up. Whoever heard or even thought of Chuck E. Cheese's with regard to Native American literature? Where are our bison and war paint and tomahawks and the ohs and hows? Good grief, dear listener, what are we up against? This Midge lady comes along and dumps one little story or vignette after another, all guaranteed to funny you up like wildfire. Just as I mentioned about Birchfield and Company, look at a few of Ms. Midge's titles. How Sacagawea Got Her Groove Back, The Wild West Wing, and Wild Bill Hiccup. Hey America, I'm Taking Back Thanksgiving. Ghoul Interrupted. And of course, the book's title. Now I ask you, ain't these all belly whoppers? Here's a selection of a few of the one-liners. Laughing out loud is permitted. Being that so many white people believe that Indians practice magic, you'd think they'd try and be nicer to us. For $1,000, I'll teach you Native American rituals. The first cleansing rite involves you, a brush, ammonia, and my kitchen floor. As a Native American wordsmith, I use every part of the sacred sentence. All this talk about the depth and richness of his skin made me think she wanted to make a skin suit from his hide. I will fight no more about putting the toothpaste cap back on the tube forever. Vice President Pence with a MySpace page. Mikey likes it. Thanks to Tiffany Midge, I'm anxiously awaiting, hopefully, the next time I click on my TV, the latest episode of Melania Trump's new show, The Billionaire and the Showgirl, in which a segment entitled Ted Nugent and Duck Dynasty for a Roadside Brunch is aired. And now, here's my favorite. Trump pardons zombie apocalypse, in which zombies, having wreaked havoc in the streets by attacking and eating people's brains, and then being imprisoned during the Obama administration, are pardoned by the Donald, keeping to his promise to undo all the damage done by the previous president. Trump tweets that the zombies were just doing their job. So now, you want you a laugh or two? Then go find you an Indian seems to be the message here. But like I've been saying all along, we sure enough got some right here, all guaranteed to tickle your funny bone in more ways than just a smidge. 1. My origin story is a cross between Call Me Ishmael, a few too many whiskey sours packed in an old thermos at the drive-in double feature, and that little voice that says, "You got this." Bury my heart at Chuck E. Cheese's. The day of my mother's funeral service, I separated myself from the rest of the grieving throng and hid out in the musician's belfry like tortured Quasimodo, my grief too hideous to expose. I peered down upon the mourners below, watched my aunts struggling with folding a star quilt, trying to contain it within the casket. The lid wouldn't close. The white pastor believed my mother's quilt was some sort of ancient Lakota ritual. He announced it with gravity and a sense of suspicious distance. Native flute music floated out from the speakers as my aunties struggled to close the lid, both furtively cramming the ends of the quilt into the casket, tucking my mother inside. One of them gestured exasperatingly to the other, and then they both started to laugh. Months before her death, my mother made me promise that we'd bury her in her royal blue pantsuit, her favorite color. She forced her jewelry on me. Take this and this. Here, take this. It is both touching and morbid to accept a dying woman's most personal belongings. Her favorite silver and turquoise earrings, the onyx bracelet, the Black Hills gold rings. She even gave me her little silver buffalo pendant. I wore it to a grade school presentation, and one of the children raised her hand and asked, "Is that a pig?" The crucial difference between having children versus having pets is that when your sister's cat gets run over by a car, you can say things like, "She was never very bright." Wakes lasted for days, my mother says. We'd get bored waiting around while the old people sat huddled over like crows. Sometimes we'd tell the younger kids that the host needed to use the outhouse for extra storage until it was time for the deceased to be buried. We'd tell the kids that it was a multiple fatality car accident, lots of parts that needed storing. Those kids refused to use the outhouse after that. On the day my mother received her test results, we stopped off at a restaurant for lunch. The waitress complimented my mother on her earrings. My mother laughed. "You want them? I won't be needing them." Grandma Iron Thunder service was held on a scorching day in the middle of August on the Dakota Plains. There was gold-colored grass and blinding sky for miles in every direction. Her casket was draped with a red quilt featuring the famous silhouette, the end of the trail stitched in black cloth. My mother clucked, "I hate that quilt. Good thing they're burying it." Following the fire and brimstone of my mother's memorial service, I wended my way down the spiral staircase from the musician's belfry, and a church lady I'd never met before congratulated me on my beautiful singing. "You have such a beautiful voice," she cooed. I thanked her, taking the credit, even though I had not been singing at all. On November 22nd, 1963, at the doctor's office, my mother and her husband received news that he had 6 months to live. Immediately following the short walk to their car, Frank switched on the radio, and they listened briefly to the story about the assassination of President Kennedy. Then they switched off the radio and started driving back home to spend time with their new baby daughter. My Grandma Wing's funeral was held in the old church and cemetery at Fort Peck. She requested everyone wear white. She was 98. The service was dignified and affecting, replete with a mix of traditional and Christian songs. As the service was finishing up and people were paying their respects, a melee erupted outside. A dozen or more cousins jumped Rachel's baby daddy and beat him to a pulp. All those white shirts and all those white pants stained with blood and dirt. Someone said, "Clyde's last stand." The men all laughed. During a trip to Mexico, my sister tattooed my mother's name, Alita Rose, surrounded by roses onto her ankle. A few years later, following the death of my father, I considered getting a tattoo in tribute to him also, but Herman Lloyd just didn't have the same cachet. When my mother's respirator was finally removed, and we watched the monitor slowly wind down, and when I finally left the hospital, a 3-year-old girl refused to let me pass her until I acknowledged her ecstatic announcement. "We just had a baby." The Lakota unburdened themselves of hair, of fingers, cut into their flesh to temporarily escape the grief of a loved one's death. I saw this on A Man Called Horse and in Dances with Wolves. But as far as I knew, no one in my immediate family had ever done this. My mother was worth far more than a hank of hair. She was worth my spine, my eyes, my womb. There are many versions of the scenes that take place inside my head. A dying mother instructs her daughter with her last wishes. But the one I remember the most is poached from a meme making the rounds online. "I want my remains spread at Disneyland," my mother says, "but I don't want to be cremated. Just leave my parts." Okay, I promise. You can bury my heart at Chuck E. Cheese's. Okay, you got it. Bury my heart at SeaWorld. I will, Mama. I will fight no more about putting the toothpaste cap on forever. We were 2 Indian women, laughing until our bellies ached, spitting death right in the eye. Headlines. I've been saving newspaper clippings, curious human interest stories to inspire my writing efforts. A cache of yellowed newsprint lies in a small pile. Woman charged with death of overfed toddler. Man married 29 times will have funeral. Mermaid girl to have legs split. One clipping is particularly compelling. Mother's coma ends after 16 years. The woman resurrected from her coma is Standing Rock Sue. She emerged from her 16-year sleep on Christmas Eve, and her nickname is Happy, which makes me think of the 7 Dwarfs, which makes me think of another Disney icon, Sleeping Beauty, a more apt attribution. My headlines collection today is harvested mostly from Facebook news feeds. The day my pastor claimed gay people are possessed by fart demons that can drive pigs to suicide. Charles Manson's wedding canceled. Bride just wanted his corpse to make money. Idaho lawmaker wonders if women could have gyno exam by swallowing a little camera. Years ago, I watched a TV movie starring Elizabeth Montgomery from Bewitched. The movie was about a woman who re-emerged after being in a coma for over a decade. Her readjustment from having been a popular high school cheerleader to being poised on the edge of middle age met with harrowing challenges. A handsome high school basketball coach fell in love with her and aggressively pursued her, trying to break down the barriers of her teenage shyness, which culminated in the literal breaking down of her door, yelling, "Love me!" She finally submitted. These days, There'd be a 12-step group for what the basketball coach was afflicted with, not to mention a restraining order. Pastor claims women are penis homes and men's penises belong to God. My Aunt Carlotta suffered a brain aneurysm and never woke up. She'd always been active and in good health. She and her husband had just adopted a little boy. She sent us pictures. And then, abruptly, silence. For nearly 2 decades she slept, wasted away, slept, growing thinner and thinner, sleeping and sleeping, in a convalescent home outside Glasgow, Montana. Her husband remarried. Her little boy grew up and married. Relatives passed away. Presidents served out their terms, were re-elected, served out those terms. More headlines. The Berlin Wall fell. The United Nations declared war in the Middle East. Waco. O.J. Simpson. Oklahoma City terrorism. Cloned sheep. First black president. My aunt slept and slept. Practical help for the demon-possessed. Vatican rolls out new exorcism course. Some thought my aunt was the victim of Indian witchery. A jealous enemy, perhaps. An imagined trespass or a real trespass. I don't know that I believe in those things. I don't know if I even believe in ghosts. Believing might only allow such things to surface. Once, I wished out loud for a woman to be dead, and the next year she died, her body blooming with tumors. She was my boyfriend's old lover, a kindled old flame, and was a catalyst for the breakup of his marriage, a wedge in his relationships that followed. Like with me. I was not the only woman in his life who seethed with jealousy. Woman in sumo wrestler suit assaults ex-girlfriend in gay pub after she waved at man dressed as Snickers bar. My father had dated Aunt Carlotta before he met and married my mother. Carlotta was my mother's sister-in-law. It was less than a year after my mother's husband died that my mother married my father, her sister-in-law's ex-lover. I wish I knew why my dad and Carlotta broke up. I don't know if there was any animosity between my mother and Carlotta. They always seemed to be good friends. But you never know. It is easy to become confused about these things. Students cook and serve grandparents. My mother's best friend in Haver, Montana, Twyla, was stricken with a troubled marriage. Maybe stricken is the wrong word. It wasn't like getting the flu. But then again, maybe a troubled marriage is like getting the flu. If I can wish someone dead, certainly someone else could catch a bad marriage. That marital virus that's going around, maybe even a hex. Twyla's husband stalked her whenever she went out. He thought she was running around on him. Mason stowed away in the trunk of her Riviera, and she caught him when she put groceries in the trunk. On another night, my mother dropped by to visit, and as she was getting out of her car to walk up to the house, she discovered Mason perched 12 feet high in the branches of a tree, spying on his wife. Man with nothing to declare has 55 tortoises in his pants. The Lakota word for horse is shunka wakan. Wakan, which translates to sacred or mystery, and shunka, meaning dog. The Sioux are a horse culture, and the horse is highly revered, a spiritual being. This makes my childhood allergies to horsehair particularly ironic. It would have been hard for me if I lived in olden times. I was also allergic to rabbit fur as a child. This seems less of a problem, since as far as I know, rabbits aren't especially revered. Not like horses, anyway. I suppose my father didn't take this into account, the fact that my mother was Lakota and raised on a reservation in eastern Montana, when he brought home what looked like a gift and presented it to my mother. It was a package wrapped in brown butcher paper and tied off with white string. Words were exchanged between my parents, voices raised, some alarm, and then my mother rushed from the kitchen in tears. My father calmly pulled out a fry pan, unwrapping the meat from its brown paper and cooking it like it was any other. PETA suggests Washington Redskins keep controversial name. Change logo to potato. I learned of death's paradoxes when I was 6. How acts of violence are sometimes demonstrations of mercy, even love. Along a Pacific beach, he found a wounded mallard and applied an axe to end its suffering. From flight and prey to a naturalist specimen, the mallard submitted to an inexact science, one of air and wind, one of pressure and temperature, one of sand and ocean salt. Among the viscera and ruins, my father indicated the transparent bubble. This is how it floats. A fretwork of shadow and light, the blood mirrored the portentous reading of clouds, a swirl of lines and curves from where a song begins. Emotional support pig kicked off Flyte for being disruptive. The last time I ever saw Jeff alive, he gave me a gift, an hourglass. And it took over 2 decades later for the symbolism to finally dawn on me. An hourglass, gifted from a young man with one foot planted in the next world. His time was running out. Even the hourglass he gifted me appeared to have been stolen. I imagine from the desktop of one of the school classrooms he was hired to clean. Not borrowed time, but stolen. Old man, 98, wins lottery, dies next day. Agoraphobic grandma finally leaves home, immediately falls down manhole. When were these photos taken? I ask my mother. We are removing items from her dresser drawers, taking inventory to prepare for the day she will die. She has lung cancer. I hold up the black and white photos for her to see. I have never seen them before. There are 3 pictures, all taken in the same location, some isolated forest road. She looks gorgeous, disheveled, dreamy. They are from an earlier era, the 70s, taken when I was still very small, when I lived with both of my parents, my sister, and my grandfather. The photos were taken by her lover, a man my mother admits was a close friend of our family. I barely remember him. She hid the pictures away for years. The eagle has landed. 2 men walk on the moon. Chronicles of an affair with his secretary found in an abandoned suitcase. Lana Turner's daughter fatally stabs her mother's lover. 2. Instead of a Raised by Wolves t-shirt, mine says, Raised by functional alcoholics with intimacy phobias and low self-esteem. The Jimmy Report. Thursday, May 7th, 2004, 11 a.m., Bellingham, Washington. I pass by the front counter and spot him in the back, climbing out from beneath a massive pile of textiles. He's wearing dark blue polyester pants from a deceased World War II veteran's closet. The pants have multicolored dashes woven into the fabric that look like a moth infestation. They're obviously too big for him, and he belts them with an orange scarf. Jimmy owns and operates Blue Moon Vintage Clothing, housed in a proverbial bulwark near the waterfront in the Old Town section of Bellingham. I happened to catch him on a good day. His mood's up due to a windfall.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?